Good morning, everybody. So this is indeed my 25th year in this industry. And during those 25 years, I've seen things, lots of things, things that you wouldn't believe. We've seen companies go bankrupt after getting hacked. We've seen planes and plants and space stations getting infected by malware. That's a true story. We've seen cops pay money to criminals in order to get rid of their malware. So today, I'd like to talk to you about the world where we all live in. Because behind us lies 2015, one of the most confusing, disturbing, and politically complicated years we've seen in decades. Technology has always played an important role in such complications, and technology has always played an important role in conflict. But no technology has been more relevant to conflict than the internet. And today, I would like to show you why. So, a long, long time ago, we were living on a planet which had no borders. We had no borders at all. Then we humans came around. When humans were in the picture, everything changed. We sharpened stones, we cut down trees, we made weapons, and we made homes, and we hunted. We even developed the skill of speech, so we could tell one another how unhappy we were with the general state of things, and if someone else disagreed with us, then we would cut down more trees, sharpen more stones, and convince them of our argument. Humans discovered fire and made things out of metal. And humans had gods, lots of gods, gods that mastered the elements and wars. Humans wandered the planet, spreading language, spreading technologies, and spreading belief systems. And we had cities, cities that grew out of dust. And those cities, they had walls around them. And this is important. Cities had walls. Walls with doors to keep people out and to keep people in. The walls were there to protect and to suppress. The walls were a level of security for the people and for the state. There was incredible wealth and unimaginable poverty. And through all of this is the undeniable connection between control and power, between fear and technology. Those walls, the walls around cities, they became higher, they became longer, they became wider. The longer and wider those walls, the more invisible they became. Those walls marking areas of wealth and prosperity and power. Eventually, those walls became borders. Walls became borders. They became invisible fences of ownership. And borders were enabled by a technology, the technology of map making. Technology of map making enabled borders. Many of those borders remain today. Many have disappeared. Many have been moved with wars. The staggering possibilities of technology always seem to shine at their strongest during periods of war. And most early wars were over the ownership of land or shifting of the borders. Traditionally, conflicts arose around one group of people wanting something that another group of people had, or one group of people was at odds with the belief system of another group of people. And war is what happens when words and diplomacy fail. Thousands of years of conflict have made us humans very good at making things for war. War has been a real driver of technology, and technology has been a real driver for war. Gunpowder, tempered steel, blades, and cannons are all examples of technology of war. The British won the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, even though they were far, far outnumbered by their enemy, the French. They did not win that battle because they were stronger. They did not win that battle because their leader, Henry V, would have been a smarter military tactician. No, they won because they had better technology. They won because they had the technology of longbow and arrows. World War I and World War II were technology accelerator labs. They were wars that were technology accelerator labs. We found new ways of attacking enemy infrastructure. We found new ways of causing havoc. The brightest minds were taken from their universities to develop weapons, including the weapons of mass destruction. The Second World War was also the first time a computer was used in a conflict. Granted, we aren't speaking here about cyber warfare, but about breaking the encryption that was used to protect military communications. Nevertheless, computer age started with a world war. Jet engines, chemical weapons, plastic explosives, radar, rocketry, and a host of other technologies were developed and had a lasting effect upon the lives that we live today. But one development changed and determined the course of geopolitics for the next 60 years, and that was the development of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons did not just split the atom. Nuclear weapons also split the world in two. They split the world in East and West. The Iron Curtain was a new kind of a border, yet another border. It was a border of things. Things like the arms race, the Cold War, espionage, counterintelligence, information warfare, and the Berlin Wall. Some of us do not remember the Cold War. Some of us remember it very well. Those of us who remember Cold War will recall the constant fear of imminent disaster. Our world could end any minute. For soldiers, the invention of the nuclear weapon was like a gift from heavens. What could be more excellent than nuking your enemy tens of thousands of miles away from the comfort of your own bunker? Excellent. Too bad that the enemy had the same weapons too. The Cold War was a glorious time for war, because never before in history it was so clear who is the enemy. The enemy was clear, the borders that we must not cross were clear, and the means of war were clear too. If there was going to be war, it would be fought with nuclear weapons. So we were living in a constant state of fear. We even had a fear meter. We had a fear meter. It was called the DEFCON meter. DEFCON, which stands for Defense Readiness Condition Meter. That's what DEFCON stands for. It doesn't stand for the party in Vegas. It stands for Defense Readiness Condition. And that meter, the DEFCON meter, it would tell us how close we were to the end of the world. We had a meter which would tell us how close we were to the end of the world. Yep, it sure sounds strange now. Now, one of the side effects of the Cold War was that we created the internet. And today, we're all here because of the internet. The internet changed the world. That's quite clear. But the internet did start from the Cold War. US military created the internet as a way to uphold a chain of command during nuclear war. The internet was created as a military infrastructure. And by developing the internet, mankind opened up a whole new way of waging war on one another. War online, online war, or if you will, cyber war. Now, I don't really like the word cyber war at all. and it's obviously misused all the time. Because cyber war is in the media all the time. Whenever there's any hack or breach or leak, it's always labeled as a cyber war, especially if it's believed to be linked to a nation state. However, most of the cases that we see aren't war, they aren't anything like that. Most of the APT cases or targeted attacks or nation state attacks that we analyze are actually about espionage, about spying. And it's no wonder that espionage and spying has moved online, because espionage is about collecting information. Well, information used to be something that you had to physically go to the information because it was on paper. So you had to go there to get the papers or copy the papers. But for the last 30 years, information hasn't been paper anymore. Information is data. So you don't have to go there. So it's quite obvious why espionage expanded to the online world. But espionage is not war. Espionage is espionage. And if it's not war, we shouldn't call it a war. Yes, there are some exceptions. Not all APT cases or targeted cases are just about espionage. You know, for example, Stuxnet clearly was a destructive attack, or what we've now seen with the attacks against the power systems in Ukraine aren't about espionage. But the vast, vast majority of APT cases are espionage, and we really shouldn't be calling it war. We shouldn't be calling it cyber war either. So the internet. The internet has no geography. The internet has no geography, no distances, no borders. It's a different world. By creating the internet, we, the mankind, we faced a new future where tangible borders and recognizable enemies ceased to exist. We should also note that the power of nuclear weapons and the power of the nuclear arms race was mostly in deterrence. We have used nuclear weapons in war 2 times, twice. The whole power of nuclear weapons was in deterrence. It was in knowing who has the weapons. And we know who has the weapons, because those who have nuclear weapons are testing them in nuclear tests, which are easy to see. So you know those guys have nuclear weapons because they are blowing up nuclear weapons, right? Even today, it's trivial for us to list who has nuclear weapons. United States, Russia, China, United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. 9 countries, that's it. And when you know who has nuclear weapons, then you know who you don't want to mess with. This is known as deterrence. That's how it works. The difference between the nuclear arms race and cyber arms race is that in cyber arms race, we have no idea who has what, which means we have no deterrence out of cyber arms. Yes, we can probably guess that the United States has invested more into cyber arms development and offensive capabilities than any other country, so they're probably the best in the world. But when you go beyond that, it gets really complicated. For example, what is the offensive online capability of, say, Vietnam? What is the offensive online capability of South Africa? What is the offensive online capability of Brazil? Do you know? Because I sure don't. So we get no deterrence out of there. And this might actually change in the future. But right now, the power of cyber arms is not in deterrence. Maybe in the future, one day, we will see militaries openly do public, I don't know, cyber war tests or somehow show what they can do in order to get deterrence power out of cyber arms. But right now, that's not a reality. It's going to take a long while until we get to that. It's going to take a long while until we get to talks about cyber disarmament either. And this new arms race, cyber arms race, this is just starting. It's starting right now. It's going to be going on for years and years, maybe decades and decades. We've only seen the very beginning of the cyber arms race. And this race is on because these kind of weapons work. They are cheap, they're accessible, and they are deniable. That's a great combination for a weapon. And they are deniable. We really don't have a single nation-state malware case or APT case where we could 100% prove who did it. Yeah, in most cases we actually know who did it, sort of, but we can't prove it, which is a great example on how deniable these kinds of weapons actually are. Technology of war has moved on. We can no longer clearly describe who the enemy is, what they want, or what their motives are. Which means we go into battle using technologies we don't fully understand against enemies who are in the shadows, and we go on into conflicts that we will never know if they are over or not. So who is the enemy? Is it the criminals? Is it the evil hackers? Is it the anonymous, the Russian mafia, North Korea, the Islamic State? Good questions. So, what could happen today? What could be possible? What could be doable? Let's take an example. How about an attack against, say, a food processing plant or a beverage bottling plant? How about attack against a Coca-Cola bottling plant somewhere in Europe? For example, somewhere in the United Kingdom. How about that? Well, did you know that over 97% of the Coca-Cola products sold in the United Kingdom are made in UK, mostly in their largest plant, which is in Wakefield, Yorkshire, which is pretty much dead center in the United Kingdom. In that single factory, they bottle a remarkable 40,000 bottles an hour. 40,000 bottles of Coca-Cola an hour. Details of their machinery, of their automation gear, and of their plant locations are all online, and anybody can easily find them with a simple Google search. LinkedIn lists dozens of their key employees, not just their managers, but actually plant automation staff as well. So, with that kind of information, their operation could be targeted in various different ways. You could launch watering hole attacks against their key employees. You could backdoor updates for their ICS gear. You could try to find vulnerable remote access points, and so on. But why? Why would anybody do that? Why would anybody want to disrupt a company like Coca-Cola? A company like that could be targeted simply because it's so big, because it's so visible, and because it stands for something. What is more American than Coca-Cola? What's a better symbol for capitalism? What's a better symbol for wealth? What's a better symbol for creed? If you attack Coca-Cola, you attack everything that the brand stands for. In fact, you attack everything that America stands for. The most important underlying technology in all of this is, quite simply, electricity. That's why it really should be the most important resource we need to be protecting. Without electricity, we wouldn't be able to bottle Coca-Cola. Without electricity, we actually aren't able to feed our people. Our next conflict will be one without borders. Our next conflict will be fought against people that have motivations which are hard for us to understand. In the past, there were enemies and allies. In the past, people were with us or against us. In the past, fighters wore uniforms with flags on them, so you knew which side they were on. But in future conflicts, groups come and go. In future conflicts, joint attacks are made. In future conflicts, extremists can team up with hackers. Hackers can team up with fanatics, and fanatics can team up with criminals. About criminals, we already know by monitoring the Bitcoin blockchain traffic that the most successful Russian cybercrime gangs have made hundreds of millions of dollars with their attacks. These are the ransomware gangs using ransom Trojans. Several hundreds of millions of dollars. So the question is, do we already have the first cybercrime unicorns? Cybercrime unicorns. Think about that. It sure is strange. So here we are speaking about industrial control systems. Now everything in the world of industrial control systems is global. Everything in the world of industrial control systems is international. Everything in it. So when we speak about geopolitics, it's very remarkably present in everything we do in industrial control systems. So how does a plant in Japan trust the PLCs they bought from a company in Germany? Or how do they trust the routers they bought from a company in China? How do they trust the sensors they bought from a company in the Netherlands? How do they trust the workstations they bought from a company in the United States? How do they trust the security system they bought from a company in Russia? That's a great question, isn't it? After all, you must buy from somewhere. Either you choose a vendor or you don't operate at all. One of the reasons we are asking these questions today is Mr. Snowden. His exposés on the overreach of the US intelligence agencies were staggering. Learning that the National Security Agency actually does intercept Cisco routers while they are being shipped to customers is a pretty big deal. Learning that they do that so that they can insert backdoors into those routers is a pretty big deal too. It's a big deal to us, and it's a big deal to Cisco. And there's plenty of bad news that did not come from the Snowden revelations. For example, the Flame malware, which was most likely created by a US intelligence agencies. In order to spread Flame, the attackers used a workstation in the target network which spoofed itself to look like a Windows Update server. And it was distributing Trojanized updates which contained the Flame malware. Now, the way Windows Update works is that other workstations will not accept those updates unless they've been signed with a digital certificate from Microsoft. The problem was that this rogue update was signed by Microsoft. It was signed with a forged digital signature, which means that the most critical network of the largest software company in the United States was attacked by their own government. And at the very same time, the single largest customer for Microsoft is the United States government. So they were attacked not just by the government, but by their largest customer at the same time. Sure is strange, isn't it? Siemens controls a very large part of the PLC market, and we know it was their systems that were circumvented in the attacks against the Iranian nuclear systems. And we keep finding vulnerabilities from routers created by Huawei. Although, as a friend of mine said, after reverse engineering a very large part of one of the Huawei routers, is that there's no way to say if that particular router was vulnerable on purpose or whether it just had shitty code. Like they say, my way or Huawei. As ICS customers, we need to know the policies our vendors have regarding their relationships with their governments. We need to know the policies our vendors have in relationships with their intelligence agencies. And clever vendors actually make their policies on things like these public. They tell the world. Knowledge like this is needed if we want there to be trust. And it all boils down to trust. Trust. Now that's a complicated word in the internet age. Let me tell you about trust. My name is Mikko. I'm Finnish. I am from Finland. Finland is the country the size of California, but we only have 5 million people. And Finland shares a 1,000-mile border with Russia. Russia is the largest country on the planet, by far. Russia has 150 million people. Finland has 5 million, Russia has 150 million people. In 1939, when Russia started invading Finland, it was quite obvious to everyone that we couldn't possibly win this fight. 5 million against 150 million. The only sensible thing for Finland to do was what most of the Eastern European countries did, which was to surrender without a fight. But we didn't do that. It might have made no sense, but we fought them anyway. We fought them anyway. Both of my late grandfathers were there over 70 years ago, fighting the Russians. And as an end result of fighting them, unlike most of the Eastern Europe, Finland kept her independence. After the war, both of my grandfathers hated the Russians, absolutely hated them. And who could blame them? What about my father? Well, he doesn't hate the Russians, but he doesn't like them either. What about me? I don't hate the Russians. I think Russia is a country full of great people and great talent. I've hired a lot of programmers and researchers from Russia over the years, and I trust many Russians personally after getting to know them. I might not trust the government of Russia, but I trust many Russians. However, I definitely do not trust Russian intelligence agencies, and I definitely do not trust President Putin. I mean, why would I? After all, trust has to be earned, and they've done nothing to earn my trust. So as I said in the beginning, behind us lies one of the most confusing, disturbing, and politically complicated year we've seen in decades. But I have hope for the future. I have hope because I believe in reboots. I believe in redemption. I believe in recovery. German philosopher Herbert Marcuse has said that the needs and greed, the hopes and fears of the inventor of a piece of technology become part of the aura of that technology. We're in the middle of a borderless conflict being played out on technical infrastructure whose aura is that of fear and mistrust. Without safety, we won't have security. Without security, we won't have trust. And without trust, we won't have anything at all. Now, we all here work in security. It is our job to do the best we can to prevent our own governments and our own politicians from eroding the trust in the technology our country builds and exports. It is our job to explore, to define, and to understand this new borderless landscape. It is our job to protect it. It is our job to understand the cyber geopolitics. That's our job. Do we want to be remembered as the generation that created technology based on paranoia? Or do we want to be remembered as the generation that created technology based on trust? How do we want to be remembered? How do you want to be remembered? Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Thank you very much.